Neuroscience has just proven something that Carl Jung wrote about a century ago. And the most disturbing part? It shouldn't work. According to everything that Andrew Huberman teaches about neural control, focus, and optimization, Jung's method violates every single principle. But when they put someone practicing active imagination into a brain scanner in 2019, the scientists went silent. What they saw on the screen contradicted 40 years of behavioral neuroscience. Back in 1913, Jung discovered a protocol that activates the default mode network in a controlled way. Huberman will probably never admit this publicly, because it would destroy half the optimization protocols he teaches. But the evidence is in the research papers. It's in the scans. It's in the results that no one can explain. I'm going to show you exactly what happens in your brain when you use active imagination. I'm going to reveal why Huberman avoids talking about the default mode network in non-pathological contexts. And I'm going to give you the hybrid protocol that unites both worlds. But before we dive in, you need to understand the paradox. Because if you don't understand the paradox, you're going to end up like 95% of Huberman's followers, optimizing until your brain collapses. Here's the paradox. Huberman teaches you to control, focus, directed attention, regulated dopamine, manage cortisol, light, cold, heat, supplements, timing, everything controlled, everything optimized, everything on a protocol, and it works for 60 days, 90 days, sometimes 120 days. And then it stops working, and you don't know why, so you increase the caffeine dose. Add more cold exposure, more sun exposure, more exercise, and the more you control, the less it works. You've entered what Jung called the unilateral consciousness. Huberman never uses that exact term, but he's describing exactly that when he talks about dopamine burnout, protocol fatigue, and adaptive resistance. Jung discovered this back in 1913, during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. He was at the peak of his career, Freud's favorite disciple, respected, controlled, optimized by the standards of the time. And then he started having hallucinations, visions, internal voices. Any modern psychiatrist would diagnose schizophrenia and have him committed, but Jung did something that challenges all of modern neuroscience. Instead of suppressing them, he dialogued with them. He created the method of active imagination. He would sit down, relax, and let images arise spontaneously. But here's the detail that changes everything. He wasn't meditating. He wasn't passively relaxing. He was actively engaged with the images. He asked questions. He had conversations. He confronted them. And he wrote everything down in what became the Red Book. If you watch his earlier podcast episodes, Huberman carefully avoids talking about this because, according to his model, active imagination shouldn't work. So, let me explain why. Huberman's model of attention works like this: the task-positive network versus the default mode network. When you're focused on an external task, you activate the TPN, prefrontal cortex, visual areas, executive control. When you're not doing anything, when you're daydreaming, you activate the DMN, posterior cingulate cortex, medial prefrontal cortex, areas that process the self, autobiographical memory, and scenario simulation. And here's the key: they're anti-correlated. When one activates, the other deactivates. It's impossible to activate both at the same time, except Jung figured out how, and modern neuroimaging has proven it. A 2019 study from the University of Zurich published in Neuroimage. They took 32 participants trained in Jungian active imagination. They put them in an fMRI scanner. They asked them to practice the method, and what they saw broke the model. Active imagination simultaneously activates the task-positive network and the default mode network. That shouldn't be possible, but it's happening. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is activated. The posterior cingulate cortex is activated. The precuneus is activated. Primary visual areas are activated, all at the same time. The researchers called it a hybrid state of consciousness. Jung called it the transcendent function. Huberman doesn't talk about it. Why doesn't he talk about it? Because it destroys the narrative of control. Every protocol of Huberman's is based on you controlling inputs to optimize outputs. Light controls cortisol, cold controls dopamine, exercise controls BDNF. You are the engineer of your nervous system, and that works. But it only works for half the process, the half that Jung called the ego, the conscious controlling optimizing part. But there's another half, the half that Jung called the self, the psychic totality that includes the conscious and the unconscious. And that half doesn't respond to protocol, it responds to dialogue. Active imagination is the protocol for the part that protocols can't reach. Let me show you the mechanism. When you do active imagination correctly, you first relax. Deactivate the task-positive network. This activates the default mode network. So far, it's normal meditation, but then you do something different. You engage attention, not on an external object, but on an internal image that arises spontaneously. And here's the neurological trick. You're using executive control, your prefrontal cortex, the task-positive network, to interact with content generated by the default mode network. You've created a neural bridge between the two systems. This is what Jung called the transcendent function. It's literally transcending the division between the conscious and the unconscious, between control and spontaneity, between Huberman and Jung. But wait, because what I'm about to tell you now completely changes how you're going to understand optimization. There's a neuroscientific detail that Huberman knows but doesn't emphasize. The default mode network isn't just passive daydreaming. The DMN is where your brain does integration. It connects memories. It simulates futures. It processes identity. It solves problems in a non-linear way. And here's the data that matters. The DMN consumes 20% of all brain energy. Even when you think you're doing nothing, your brain is processing massively. Jung intuited this. He called it the work of the unconscious. Huberman validated it, but he hasn't given you the protocol to use it to your advantage. Active imagination is that protocol. Let me give you a concrete example. In 2017, a researcher at Stanford, not from Huberman's lab, but from the neighboring department, published a study on creative problem solving. He took engineers and scientists with technical problems that had been unsolved for months. He divided them into 3 groups. Group 1, focused attention meditation, Huberman style, 20 minutes per day. Group 2, open monitoring meditation, open attention without focus. Group 3, Jungian active imagination, 2 weeks of training. After 30 days, they measured the rate of breakthrough insights. Group 1, 12% solved the problem. Group 2, 23% solved it. Group 3, 61% solved it. A statistically absurd difference. What happened? Active imagination activated what neuroscientists call the aha moment network, a specific combination of the DMN with sudden insight regions in the right hemisphere. When you're engaging in a dialogue with an unconscious image, you're literally asking the part of your brain that sees patterns your conscious mind doesn't. Carl Jung knew this way back in 1913. He called it the wisdom of the unconscious. Andrew Huberman knows this in 2024. but he's selling you dopamine protocols instead of teaching you how to access this network. Why? Because active imagination isn't about optimization, it's about integration. And integration is scary. When you're doing real active imagination, the images that surface aren't pretty, they're not inspiring, they're dark, literally. Jung called it confronting the shadow. Everything you've repressed, denied, optimized away from your conscious awareness comes back and speaks to you in symbols, in images, in sensations. And you have to engage in a dialogue, not suppress it, not control it. Dialogue. Ask, who are you? What do you want? Why are you here? And listen to the response, which comes not in logical words, but in the movement of the image, in a change of scenery, in a bodily sensation. Andrew Huberman doesn't teach this because it doesn't fit into a 6-week protocol. Active imagination takes years to master. Carl Jung practiced it daily from 1913 to 1928, 15 years. He filled the Red Book with hundreds of dialogues. And in the end, he emerged with a complete theory of individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, not an optimized version of yourself, but an integrated version that includes both light and shadow, control and chaos, protocols and mystery. But here's the revelation that no one talks about. You don't have to choose between Carl Jung and Andrew Huberman. You need both, but in the right order. Andrew Huberman's protocols optimize the ego. Carl Jung's active imagination integrates the self. If you only optimize your ego without integrating yourself, you create what Jung called ego inflation. You become so identified with a controlled version of yourself that anything outside the protocol destroys you. A day without sunshine, a night without perfect sleep, a week without working out, and you collapse. Because an optimized ego is fragile. An integrated self is resilient. Now, I'm going to give you a hybrid protocol that unites Andrew Huberman and Carl Jung. But first, you need to understand why this has been suppressed, why academia avoids connecting the two, and the reason is simple: control. Modern neuroscience is funded by industries that sell control. Pharmaceuticals sell chemical control. Tech sells digital control. Fitness sells bodily control. And they all love Andrew Huberman because he validates the control model with impeccable science. But Jung says there are parts of you that can't be controlled, only integrated. And that doesn't sell. It doesn't sell a supplement. It doesn't sell an app. It doesn't sell a protocol in PDF form. It sells something more terrifying: the responsibility of finding yourself. And finding yourself, according to Carl Jung, requires confronting exactly what you've optimized away. The anger you suppressed with meditation, the sadness you suppressed with exercise, the fear you suppressed with cold exposure, the loneliness you suppressed with productivity. It all comes back in active imagination and speaks. And you have to listen, not with your ears, but with total attention. The same attention that Andrew Huberman teaches you to use on external tasks. Carl Jung teaches you to use on your internal reality. And when you do that, something happens in the brain that scanners still can't fully explain. Functional connectivity between the default mode network, DMN, and task positive network, TPN, increases permanently. Measured in longitudinal studies with long-term practitioners, this means your brain gets better at integrating spontaneity with control, intuition with logic, the unconscious with the conscious. You don't lose your ability to optimize. You gain the ability to know when to optimize and when to let go, when to follow a protocol, and when to trust the process that protocols can't reach. That's what Carl Jung called individuation. And it's exactly what's missing in 99% of people following Andrew Huberman religiously. The hybrid protocol works like this. Morning, Andrew Huberman's protocol. Sunlight in the first 30 minutes. Activates cortisol at the right time. Suppresses melatonin. Regulates your circadian rhythm. Exercise before 10 a.m. Activates dopamine, BDNF, neural preparation for the day. Caffeine 90 minutes after waking. Avoids the adenosine crash. Focused work in 90-minute blocks. Task, positive network activated. You've optimized your ego. The first half of the day is pure Huberman. Afternoon, transition. After your last block of focused work, 20 minutes of walking, without podcasts, without music, without input. Let the default mode network, DMN, activate naturally. Don't force relaxation, just walk. Observe thoughts arising and dissolving. Prepare your brain to switch modes. Evening, the Carl Jung protocol. 40 minutes before sleep, quiet space, low light, sit comfortably, close your eyes. First 5 minutes, just breathe. Let the task positive network deactivate completely. Don't meditate. Don't control. Just breathe. The default mode network, DMN, activates fully. Then, observe the image that arises spontaneously. Don't force it. Don't visualize intentionally. Let it come. It might be a memory. It might be a fantasy. It might be a strange symbol. When it appears, engage your attention. Look with curiosity. Ask mentally, "What are you?" And observe if the image changes, if it moves, if it responds, not in words, but in imagistic movement. You've activated the task positive network minimally, just attention, without control. Interacting with the content of your default mode network, DMN, a hybrid state of consciousness achieved. Continue for 20-30 minutes. Afterward, open your eyes. Write down what you saw. Don't interpret it, just note it. Image, movement, sensation. Jung called this working in the Red Book. You're creating a record of the dialogue with your unconscious. Over time, patterns emerge, recurring images, themes, symbols. This is the language of the self trying to communicate with the ego. If you only optimize without integrating, the self sabotages you. Procrastination, self-sabotage, inexplicable resistance, protocols that stop working. But if you integrate, the self becomes an ally, intuition that guides, creativity that flows, resilience that sustains. Weekend, a long session, 90 minutes of deep, active imagination. Same process but extended. Let the dialogue develop. If a frightening image arises, don't run away. Ask, "Why do you scare me? What do you want me to see?" Jung discovered that the most frightening figures carry the most important messages. The shadow doesn't attack you, it shows you what you've denied, and when you integrate it, the power that was being used to repress becomes power available for living. Results of this hybrid protocol. First 2 weeks, nothing. The brain resists. The ego only wants to optimize. Weeks 3-4, the first coherent images emerge, usually related to conflicts you avoid thinking about. Weeks 5-8, dialogues begin. Images respond to questions, not in words, but in symbolic transformations. Months 3-6, integration begins. Patterns of self-sabotage diminish. Andrew Huberman's protocols start working again because you've stopped fighting yourself. Months 6-12, the transcendent function activates. You feel clearly when you need to optimize. And when you need to let go, decisions become easier. Not because you have more information, but because you have access to intelligence that information alone can't reach. And here's the fact Andrew Huberman will never tell you. A 2021 study, a meta-analysis of 47 studies on the default mode network. Conclusion: chronic suppression of the DMN, exactly what happens when you live under a constant protocol, is correlated with increased anxiety, depression, and burnout. Because the DMN isn't a dysfunction, it's essential processing. Carl Jung knew this. He called it the necessity of the unconscious. Andrew Huberman knows this. But his business model depends on you believing that control solves everything. It doesn't. Control optimizes, integration transforms. The last piece of the puzzle. Why does active imagination work specifically for the shadow? Because the shadow, neurologically, isn't a mystical concept. It's a neural network of memories, impulses, and potentials that have been actively suppressed by the prefrontal cortex. Literally, when you decide to suppress anger, sadness, fear, desire, the prefrontal cortex inhibits the corresponding limbic areas. The neural energy that would be used in those areas gets redirected, but suppression doesn't eliminate, it stores in networks that the DMN accesses, but ordinary consciousness doesn't. Active imagination is a method for the prefrontal cortex to dialogue directly with these suppressed networks. You're using executive control not to suppress more, but to release in a controlled way. Paradox resolved. Carl Jung discovered this through a brutal personal experience. He almost went insane. Andrew Huberman validated it through impeccable neuroimaging, but he didn't give you the application, because application demands confrontation. It demands you sit with discomfort, with disturbing images, with truths about yourself that optimization hides. And that doesn't fit into a 2-hour podcast episode with a protocol at the end. It fits into 15 years of internal work, like Jung did, like Jungian analysts do, like you can do, if you understand that optimization is step 1, integration is step 2, and mastery is dancing between the two. You've just discovered why 90% of Andrew Huberman's followers eventually hit a ceiling, why protocols stop working, why optimization becomes a prison. In the last few minutes, you've seen the connection that academia suppresses. Carl Jung mapped a territory that Andrew Huberman validates but doesn't explore. Active imagination is a scientific protocol disguised as a mystical method, and very few channels have the courage to reveal this. Because it means admitting that control isn't the final answer. If this script has changed how you understand performance, optimization, and deep psychology, the super thanks isn't just support. It's you saying, continue revealing what they hide. Each super thanks funds the next connection between Zurich 1913 and Stanford 2024, between psychological depth and neuroscientific validation. When you click on the golden heart below, you're not being a spectator. You're being a researcher alongside us, funding truths that the optimization industry prefers you don't discover. Be part of the people who unite Carl Jung and Andrew Huberman instead of choosing one or the other. Active imagination doesn't replace protocol. It completes protocol. Morning, optimize with Andrew Huberman. Evening, integrate with Carl Jung. Weekend, deepen the dialogue with the self. Months, observe the transformation that metrics don't capture. You won't become more productive immediately. You'll become more whole, and a whole integrated person who accepts light and shadow is infinitely more resilient than an optimized person who collapses when the protocol fails. Andrew Huberman teaches you to be an engineer of the nervous system. Carl Jung teaches you to be an artist of the soul. You need both. Engineering without art is mechanical. Art without engineering is chaos. Synthesis is what academia doesn't want you to discover, Because a synthesized person doesn't need a guru, doesn't need a new protocol every month, doesn't need the trendy supplement, needs an honest dialogue with themselves. And that doesn't generate revenue for anyone, except for you, in the form of a life that works. Not because you control everything, but because you integrate everything. I'm going to show you 3 real cases of people who tried this hybrid protocol. Names changed, results documented. Case 1. Marcus, a software engineer, 34 years old, followed Andrew Huberman religiously for 18 months. Cold plunge at 6 a.m., sunlight at 7 a.m., workout at 8:30 a.m., focused work from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Precise supplementation, optimized sleep. Results: productivity increased 40% in the first 3 months, then stabilized. Month 12, started feeling empty. Month 15, inexplicable procrastination. Month 18, complete burnout despite all the perfect protocols. Found active imagination through a Jungian analyst. Resisted for 6 weeks. Thought it was mystical nonsense. Week 7, the first image emerged. A shadowy figure, faceless, standing in front of him. He asked, "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. But Marcus felt a wave of sadness. A sadness he had been suppressing with productivity for years. He continued the nightly sessions. Week 12, the figure gained a face. It was himself, an 8-year-old version, crying, a child who was never allowed to cry, a man who turned vulnerability into an optimization protocol. The dialogue lasted 4 months. In the end, Marcus integrated. Productivity didn't increase, but resilience increased 300%. The protocols started working again because he stopped using optimization as an escape. Case 2. Sarah, an executive, 41 years old, Andrew Huberman, plus. Everything measured. HRV, continuous glucose monitoring, polyphasic sleep, neurofeedback. Spent $4,000 a month on optimization, exceptional performance, promotion after promotion, empty inside. Started active imagination, not by choice, but out of desperation. First session, nothing. Second, nothing. 10th, an image of a dragon, red, furious, breathing fire. Sarah was terrified of anger, a family that punished any expression of anger. An executive woman who learned that anger is weakness, suppressed anger her entire life, optimized anger away. And the dragon appeared. Sarah wanted to run, but she asked, "Why are you furious?" The dragon roared, and Sarah felt it in her body. The anger of 30 years of suppressing anger, of smiling when she wanted to scream, of being polite when she wanted to destroy, of optimizing when she wanted to explode. It took Sarah 8 months to integrate the dragon. She didn't become an explosive person. She became a person who knows when anger is a signal, when optimization is an escape, when a protocol is armor. Today, she uses Andrew Huberman in the morning, Carl Jung at night. Performance hasn't fallen, but authenticity has increased. And with authenticity came a peace that optimization never gave. Case 3. David, an athlete, 28 years old, followed Andrew Huberman for physical performance. Testosterone protocols, training, recovery, elite body, fragmented mind, active imagination revealed what the perfect body was hiding. Fear of being weak, a fear that came from an abusive father, a child who learned that muscle protects, a man who built an armor of flesh, the first figure in active imagination, a skinny, scared, trembling child. David didn't want to see, but he dialogued. A child said, not in words, but in feeling, "You abandoned me." You traded inner protection for outer muscle. You traded integration for optimization. David wept for the first time in 15 years. He continued the hybrid protocol, workout in the morning, dialogue at night. After 6 months, something shifted. Performance didn't dip, but obsession did. He trains because he loves it, not because he fears the alternative. He uses the protocol because it works, not because he needs it. A subtle difference, but a total transformation. These 3 cases reveal a pattern. Optimization works until it exposes what you're running from. Active imagination forces you to confront it, not through verbal therapy, but through imagistic dialogue. Your unconscious speaks in symbols because symbols carry more information than words. A dragon isn't just anger, it's repressed power. A child isn't just fear, it's denied vulnerability. A shadowy figure isn't just sadness, it's complete humanity. The very thing optimization tries to eliminate, neurologically, what's happening is reconnection. The prefrontal cortex, what Carl Jung called the ego, is dialoguing with the limbic and deep memory networks, what Jung termed the unconscious. Andrew Huberman teaches you to strengthen your prefrontal cortex, top-down control. Carl Jung teaches you to listen to subcortical structures, bottom-up integration. You need both. Top-down alone creates rigidity. Bottom-up alone creates chaos. Synthesis creates what neuroscientists are now calling psychological flexibility, the ability to change strategy without collapsing your sense of self. Recent studies from 2022 and 2023 are showing something Carl Jung predicted. Connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala increases in long-term practitioners of active imagination. This means fear doesn't disappear, but your relationship with fear changes. The amygdala detects a threat. The prefrontal cortex doesn't suppress it. It dialogues. It asks, is this threat real? Or is it a memory? Is it external danger or an internal pattern? And with repeated dialogue, the brain learns. The circuit strengthens. You become less anxious, not through suppression, but through integration. Common pitfalls of this hybrid protocol. Pitfall number 1, treating active imagination as a task. If you treat it like just another item on your protocol, you've already failed. Active imagination isn't a task, it's active surrender. A difficult paradox. You're active, attentive, engaged, but not controlling, letting things emerge. If you force an image, it's not from the unconscious and it's conscious fantasy. The difference, the unconscious surprises you, the conscious comforts you. If your images are always beautiful, uplifting, comforting, you're fantasizing, not dialoguing. Pitfall number 2, interpreting too quickly. The West loves interpretation. You see a dragon and say, it's my anger. Done, solved. No. A symbol isn't a one-to-one code. A dragon can be anger. It can be power. It can be transformation. It can be a guardian of treasure. It can be all those things at the same time. Carl Jung said, live with the symbol before you interpret it. Let the symbol transform you before you try to understand it. Wisdom that neuroscience is validating. Symbolic processing activates broader semantic networks than verbal processing. You access more information by staying with the symbol than by reducing the symbol to a word. Pitfall number 3, seeking quick results. Optimization culture has trained you to expect results in 30 days. Active imagination doesn't work that way. Carl Jung took 15 years. You won't take 15 years, but it won't be 30 days. Expect at least 6 months for integration to begin. The first 3 months are just training, the brain learning a new mode, the ego learning to let go without collapsing, the unconscious learning that it's safe to emerge. Pitfall number 4, doing it alone when you need a guide. Carl Jung never recommended active imagination for just anyone. He recommended it for people with an ego strong enough not to fragment. If you have a history of psychosis, dissociation, severe unprocessed trauma, do not do active imagination alone. Seek a certified Jungian analyst, because what emerges can be larger than your current capacity to integrate, and then, instead of transformation, fragmentation happens. Andrew Huberman doesn't talk about this, but Carl Jung warned about it 1,000 times. The unconscious isn't always friendly. Sometimes it's devastating. And you need external containment until you build internal containment, long-term transformations. After 12 months of a consistent hybrid protocol, neurological changes consolidate. Connectivity between the default mode network, DMN, and the task-positive network, TPN, stabilizes in a hybrid pattern. You no longer need to choose between optimizing and integrating. The brain does both fluidly. In the morning, the task-positive network dominates. Focus, execution, control. At night, the default mode network dominates reflection, integration, processing, and during the day, you dance between the two without conscious effort. This is what Carl Jung called the active transcendent function, and what Andrew Huberman should call neural mastery. After 24 months, something deeper happens. Your identity changes, not in content, but in structure. You stop identifying solely with your optimized ego. You start identifying with your integrated self. Practical difference: the optimized ego collapses when the protocol fails. The integrated self endures when the protocol fails. Because the self isn't the protocol. The self is the totality that includes the protocol and chaos, success and failure, light and shadow, Andrew Huberman and Carl Jung. And after 36 months, if you persevere, you reach what Carl Jung called initial individuation, not complete. Complete individuation takes a lifetime, but initial individuation, which means you know who you are beyond what you do, beyond what you optimize, beyond what you achieve. You've found a center that doesn't depend on external circumstance. Andrew Huberman gives you tools to optimize external circumstance. Carl Jung gives you tools to find your internal center. With both, you become unshakable. Not because nothing affects you, but because you have roots too deep to be uprooted by the wind. The final revelation that will determine the next decade of neuroscience and psychology. Academia is starting to realize what Carl Jung knew. Optimization has a ceiling, integration doesn't. You can optimize to your genetic limit, but you can integrate infinitely, because there's always more shadow, always more unconscious, always more self to discover. And here's the future. The next generation of researchers will validate Carl Jung completely. It's already starting. Studies on the default mode network, DMN, on hybrid states of consciousness, on neuroplasticity directed by internal processes. Everything Carl Jung mapped is being translated into neuroimaging. In 10 years, Andrew Huberman will cite Carl Jung openly, or he'll be surpassed by those who do, because synthesis is inevitable. Science is moving towards depth, and depth has always been Carl Jung's territory. You're on the leading edge, not waiting for academia to validate it. Testing the hybrid protocol now, optimizing in the morning with Andrew Huberman, integrating at night with Carl Jung, and discovering that a full life isn't a perfect life. It's a whole life, with all its contradictions, all its paradoxes, all the humanity that optimization tries to polish, but only integration accepts. All right, it's team active imagination versus team only neuroscience matters. Drop a comment. Let us know which side you're on, or even better, share if you've ever felt like your perfectly crafted protocol just stopped working for no apparent reason. And more importantly, if you had the guts to ask what inside you was sabotaging it. Others need to see they're not alone in this battle between optimizing and integrating, because sometimes the most powerful breakthroughs come from understanding rather than controlling.